Welcome back, and today we're doing another video where I explain quads and I review every single type of quad for your quiz or test. So let's start with making a tree. So let's start with quadrilateral, it's the most generic one. Then I think we will go down to trapezoids. Right? Then we're gonna go to kites. Trapezoids make isosceles trapezoids. And And trapezoids also make parallelograms. And these combined make a rectangle. While parallelogram and kites, these make something called a rhombus. Okay? And rectangle and rhombus makes a square. So when you're going down the tree, the properties get more specific. Okay. So now we have our tree done. This side of the tree, diagonals are actually equal. They're congruent. While for this side, we can say diagonals perpendicular. Okay, for the middle side over here, the diagonals bisect each other. Okay, now let's get started with the actual problems. Parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals. So we'll start with parallelogram over here. So we'll start with our parallelogram over here. Right here we have our parallelogram, and it says we need a parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals. So the first thing we go is we look at the perpendicular line and we look at the parallelogram. So I only see two shapes which have these characteristics, right? And I think the first one, whichever comes, is rhombus. So the answer would be rhombus. We're going to post rhombus over here. Okay, next problem. Diagonals bisect each other. Well, we looked over here. Diagonals bisecting each other. This property is found right over here at the start of parallelograms. So look at parallelograms. Okay, let's move on. C. Diagonals congruent and bisect each other. Diagonals are congruent is this one, and they bisect each other is this one. So what do you guys think? Congruent and bisects, which is the first one which comes in that list? So I don't know if y'all can see it, but it's a rectangle, because this one is coming under these two categories and it's the first one. So we're going to say it's a rectangle. Okay, next one. Opposite angles are congruent and supplementary. I want you guys to give this one a try. See if you guys can solve it. Okay, hopefully that was enough time, because this was a harder problem. So they give us that diagonals are congruent, so we're looking at this one, and they're supplementary. That means the opposite angles, when you add them up, they're supplementary, right? So the parallelogram has this trait, because opposite angles are congruent, opposite angles are supplementary. So this description would accurately match a rectangle again, because it has this property and it's meaning of the first. So we're going to give this a rectangle. Rectangle. Okay, let's move on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this tree right over. You guys feel free to do so or look at it again. There you go. Diagonals are perpendicular. When we look at it, the first thing coming is kites. So, kites. I want you guys to remember that kites have rights. Kites have rights. Because they're right triangles, right? Now let's go back. Diagonals are perpendicular and congruent. So where do we see that? The diagonal's perpendicular over here. They're congruent over here. That leaves a square. So square. Next, we'll go to diagonals bisect the vertices. For diagonals bisect the vertices, there's only one special one, which starts off. Y'all are gonna know this. Rhombus. Rhombus. Rhombus bisects the vertices, meaning that these two angles would be equal of a rhombus. Okay? Now we're gonna go with parallelograms with congruent diagonals. So parallelograms over here, congruent diagonals. You might think it's this, right? So for this problem, we're gonna look at parallelograms with congruent diagonals. So it's the same thing, parallelograms with congruent diagonals. It looks like it's a rectangle. Don't get confused, guys. Don't put isosceles trapezoid because it's outside of the pink circle. It's outside of the pink circle. Rectangle is the first one. So, okay, moving on. Sometimes, always, nevers. Let's copy your pyramid. Paste it back. Okie dokie. Opposite angles of a rhombus are congruent. So guys, rhombus has the same properties. Rhombus has the same properties as a parallelogram, right? So opposite angles are congruent in parallelograms, so it has to be in rhombus too. So we can write this as always. If y'all have any questions, make sure to put it in the comments. Okay, let's move on to number 2. If the diagonals bisect each other, it's an isosceles trapezoid. Well, where do we see bisecting? Over here, right? The diagonals bisect each other, it's an isosceles trapezoid. Where does it bisect? Over here. And can it be an isosceles trapezoid? Yes, if it's going up, it could be sometimes. Okay, let's move on to C. Let's move on to number C. Okay, a rhombus with no right angles at all and has congruent diagonals. So a rhombus, let's start at rhombus. It has no right angles at all, so it can't be a square or rectangle, and has congruent diagonals. Well, we can't go to rectangle or square since it has a right, so I think it will be never. A rectangle with perpendicular diagonals is a rhombus. Let's think about this, guys. Rectangle, look at it, right here. With perpendicular diagonals, right over here, is a rhombus. Well, when we think about this problem, a rectangle with perpendicular diagonals can be a rhombus, right? Because rectangle is a square and it could go to rhombus, so we could see that as sometimes. Sorry. A rectangle with perpendicular diagonals would actually be a square, and a square is always a rhombus, so this will be always. For the last question, a quadrilateral with 2 right angles with 2 is a rectangle. Well, it could. Well, it's at least 2, right? It's at least 2. So, with at least two. So it could be an isosceles. It could be a trapezoid actually. Could show this right out. Or it could be a square. So that's sometimes.